Thank you, Alice. Thank you. Welcome to the joint community council meeting of Westpointe and Jordan Meadows. We appreciate all of you being here. We're going to start with our community reports, and then we have a time certain at 7:30 to do our presentation with Sitla and that. So with that, and we will be having people come in because some people I think will only be coming for the Sitla presentation. So with that, Captain Jorgensen with the Salt Lake City Fire Department. Let's unmute you and let's have you go first. There's lots to talk about for you.
Well, good evening. I'm Captain Jorgensen, Fire Station 11, just here off the taxiway off the airport here off Clinton Avenue. This is my first community council meeting with you. I appreciate you having me. I've just recently transferred from downtown where I've worked for the last year, and it's good to be able to just touch bases with you. I don't know if there will be any questions. I'm trying to pull up the chat to see if anybody wants to ask questions through that, but maybe somebody will have to relay for me because I'm not pulling them up. But just to let you know, the airport's getting busy again now. It looks like we're responding to a lot of calls over there. A lot of them are accidental trips, seem to be the majority of them. Those escalators that they have are giving people reasons to have difficulties for one reason or another. And then that long walk across the tunnel from the A concourse to the B concourse has really been tripping people up. So it's been our majority of calls over there. As far as the rest of the Rose Park area, I think we're still looking at our average 7 to 8 calls. In fact, we're getting one right now that I'll need to take. But we're just glad to be here. If there's any way we can support you, please send me an email or let us know and we'll get back to you.
So Captain, before you want to just put your email in the chat and then go?
Randy, you want me to drive and finish your case part? It's a problem. That's probably a good idea.
Actually, if you have to go, goodbye.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Just
That's
the luck
okay.
of the draw.
I'll see you.
So, but thank you for supporting us. We appreciate you.
Well, thank you for your service.
Okay. Have a good night.
Detective Oliver, do you see him there, Joseph?
I'm unmuted. I don't think I can follow that. That was pretty impressive.
Well, if we start hearing gunfire, we'll know you're busy.
Yeah, no, that's not what we want to hear. Well, I kind of like to start it like all these meetings. If there's any questions, concerns, I know Dorothy brought up the shooting that happened, I think a couple days ago. I just wanted to give you a quick brief on that. There was a shooting on General Drive about 1:40 in the morning. And that was on, let me scroll up and get the right date for you, on June 5th. So that was a concern. There were 5 people that were shot. One of them was deceased and 4 of them were taken to hospitals. And I don't have a condition on the other 4 that were shot at the time. We do have people of interest, and I know they're conducting interviews constantly, and they're pretty sure they know who the suspect is. So I think it's a gang issue that happened to be also during, graduation. It was a graduation party from what it sounds like. So that was a concern. Are there any questions or anything else that maybe I can try and answer for that or for anything else that's happened in the area? All right. If not.
So Detective Oliver.
Yes.
When will we have, so the people that were involved?
Yes.
A number of them had volunteered for us at the night out 2 years ago.
Uh-huh.
They were members of the football team and they were our volunteers.
Uh-huh.
And that, so we actually kind of know, we know some of these kids. And that, so do you have any idea of when we might know more about what the condition, who it was and the condition of the people that were hospitalized?
Yeah, let's see. They should be putting that out in KSL shortly. And I don't know if the police department's going to put out any information. If they do, they'll put it out on their Twitter feed. So I would just monitor KSL. I'll monitor it as well. And once it does post, I can send that to you. I don't have any of the personal information as far as who they were other than just the generics. But that should be coming out. I mean, that should be coming out soon.
Are you concerned about any gang retaliation at this
Of
point?
course. Yes, we are. There was a certain gang that was targeted, and we know that there will be retaliation. There's been retaliation all summer, scary enough, and we're only into June. We've had more shots fired, I think, this summer than in a long time. And it's gang on gang that we're really concerned about. So yes, there is fear for retaliation. So the good news is we have an amazing gang squad. The bad news is because of our numbers, that gang squad is going to be taking patrol calls in the near future. So we will not see them out on the streets near as much as they were with the gang and working on the gang issues. So that's one of the problems that we're going to have just because of our numbers are so low. That's also with our bike squad too. Some of our our squads that are proactive, that don't respond to calls, will be going back to call-based patrols. So that's a little bit discouraging. So we hope we can get our numbers up quick enough that we can get those proactive squads back out on the street. I just wanted to go over a couple of the comp stat report numbers, and I won't take a whole lot of time, but I haven't done this in the past, and I wanted to do it a little bit different this time. I was going to start with our citywide numbers and then break it down to District 1. So you can kind of see what the difference is between our citywide numbers and the District 1 numbers themselves. In the last, I'll use all our year-to-date numbers. And if you're curious, you can get on Salt Lake City Police Department website, and all the comp stat reports for the whole year are listed there. And that's the numbers that we use and that I talk about in these meetings. We have gone up 75% in homicides in the last year in Salt Lake City. We're up 16% in forcible rapes. We are down 13% in robberies, business robberies. We're up 7% in other robberies like street robberies. We are up 1.9% in aggravated assault families, and we were up 31.3% in aggravated assault non-families. So for this city, we are up 15.9% in violent crime. That's a lot. That's concerning. That's super concerning, seeing that the violent crimes are the ones that really hit home the most, and those are up almost 16% this year. As far as total property crimes for the city, we're up 33% in burglary, residential burglaries, 35% in outbuilding burglaries, meaning any other burglary that's not a residential dwelling. We're up 32% in vehicle car prowls, and we are down 0.3% in other larcenies like petty theft and things like that. We are also up 41% in our motor vehicle thefts. So our total property crimes for the city is up 19.9% year to date. That's compared to last year. Now, with those numbers, if there's any questions, just please yell at me, because I've got the comp stat report up, so I can't really see the Zoom meeting right now. But I just wanted to compare and contrast that to District 1 data. So year to date, we're still at 0% in District 1 for homicides. So there's not been a homicide. Actually, there's been one homicide in 2021 in District 1. And that's the one I believe we just talked about that's been reported. We are up 22.2% in forcible rapes in District 1. We're up 50% in business robberies. We are down 6.7% in all other robberies. We are up 5% in family ag assaults and 18.5% in non-family ag assaults. So for District 1, we are up 12.3% in violent crimes. So as we narrow it from the 15% to the 12%, District 1 is still getting hit pretty hard with crime, violent crime. As far as the property crimes, we are up 113% in District 1 in residential burglaries, 43.3% in burglaries other, outbuildings, storage facilities. We are up 115% in vehicle car prowls, 30% in other larcenies, and 37% in motor vehicle thefts. So total property crimes, we are up 66.7% in District 1. That is a huge concern that we're trying to figure out. And the way we ask for your help is to continue to call If you see any kind of crime that you're curious about, or any suspicious situation that you're curious about, give us a call. Continue to give us a call so that we can continue to create those heat maps. Good news, bad news, if it's a property crime, or if it's not a priority crime where somebody's not currently being injured or hurt, there's chances that we may not get out there for up to 24 hours, and we may even get you on the telephone for those lower priority calls. Now, that's not the case if it's a priority one. If it's an assault that's occurring, chances are pretty good that we're going to get out there in just a few minutes. But for the tagging, for even some of the thefts, even some of the car prowls, there's a chance that we may not get out there just due to the numbers that we have in our patrol right now. So that's a concern, but we continue to want you to continue to call us so that we can see where those hot maps, those heat maps are, and that we can put as many resources as we can in those heat areas. So that's really what I have tonight. I'll stay on. If there's any questions, or if there's anything that is concerning, you can send me a text in the chat, or you can ask me questions, or whatever you want to do up to that point.
Okay, were those percentages from last month or from a year ago?
No, those were percentages up to 6/6. So that was 3 days ago. Those were compared to the year to date from last year.
Year to date, okay.
Yep, year to date. We can look at a 5-year average too. 5-year average, we're still up in District 1. We're still up 16% in violent crime, and we're up 50% in property crime. That's a 5-year year-to-date average though. And like I said, all those numbers could be found on our website, slcpd.com, resources, CompStat, and then you can just choose the latest CompStat report.
It looks like Blake put it in the chat too, the CompStat report, if anyone's interested. So thanks, Blake.
Fantastic. Thank you, sir.
Detective Oliver, thank you so very much. Eva?
Thank you so much, everyone. My name is Ava Lopez. I'm substituting for Joshua Boyle, but also in general, I am the liaison for District 4, but I am doing, I'm in a new role, which is a community coordinator position where I work with communities all over the city that aren't engaged in the community councils or that network of community organizations. So if any of you know of renters, Latinx folk, other people, that's the new role I'm trying to take on. And I'm happy to give a quick shout out to Westside Leadership Institute. They helped kind of propel this idea, and now the city's been supporting that. So thank you to Maria Garcia's and anybody else that is a part of WLI on this call. I'm going to put a few links in here. I don't want to take up too much time because I know we're a little bit on a time crunch, but there's been some exciting new movement here in the city, and I wanted to share this information. First off, I'm someone that when I was younger, I took advantage of the summer meal program. So it's super important to me to share that information with you all. I included the link so you can share it with friends, family, any community members. This youth meal program is going to be serving Monday through Friday, starting August 6th. And it's already started. It's going to go through August 6th. And you can get meals from 8:30 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. as breakfast time. And then other meals from 2:45 p.m. to 4:15 p.m. And keep up to date with the website. Sometimes they change the time in which they're serving food, but here are the locations. So we'll have the Sorensen Center, the Utah State Park, some other locations nearby and in the city. So if you're near that, please share that, especially if you know any youth that would qualify. This is, again, K through 12, so anybody that is under 18 will fall under that. And I shared in here also the Magnolia Drive information. I wanted to share that quickly. I know Josh had talked about it before, but we're still seeking and gathering new or gently used kitchen items. You can drop them off at the Magnolia. You can also drop them off to help us build a kit at the Salt Lake City office here on 450 South State Street on Saturday. So we will be collecting those items also. But really, we would love for you all to donate and build a kit. The Magnolia is the new housing where we're moving folks that maybe were suffering from, they were unsheltered or they were chronically unsheltered. And so these are folks that have now been rehabilitated into shelter space, and now this is their long-term shelter is the Magnolia. So we're really happy we could serve those community members and help them reincorporate and find new structure to their life. And with this, to really help them gravitate toward the kitchen and learn great cooking skills. I also included the locations. This was super fun. I went to the reopening of the Jordan River location sites where we have new boat ramps. So if any of you have a kayak or have an interest in water and fishing, you don't necessarily need those tools to pick up a great sport, but we have new locations at Fisher Mansion, the Gadsby Trailhead, and the Riverview Trailhead. So take advantage of that. It's not on any other side of the city other than the west side. It's so beautiful. So please take advantage of those spaces and bring kids along. I think it's super important to expose our youth to the beauteous parts of our city. And then I wanted to bring up too, if any of you know of groups or folks that want to help with, it's kind of this new endeavor. It's called plogging, but you can do it in kayaks and canoes. It's where you go, you can either jog or you can walk or you can kayak and clean up the trash near the Jordan River Trail. We're setting up volunteer groups for that. So yep, Dorothy's put that in there for the night out. So it would be awesome to get more community groups, youth-led groups, churches, etc., folks getting involved so we can really make that Jordan River more pristine than it already is. Quickly here, I want to talk about something that's very important to me, and it is the fact that we are in a drought. It's very hot, it is very dry, and we have entered a stage 2 drought. We're actually bordering a stage 3 drought. And right now, the stage 2 drought still encourages its voluntary water conservation for residents, but we ask that you practice good sprinkling habits. One of the best ways to conserve water is actually when you're brushing your teeth, please turn off the faucet. On average, that saves about 7 gallons of water usage. And so it's super helpful. Once we enter a stage 3 drought, us residents as consumers, we'll start to see that reflected in our water bills, which have already gone up actually. So please consider that we want to minimize water waste. So again, what the stage 2 drought does is, as a municipality in our municipal facilities, we're now starting to limit watering and water usage. For example, I don't know if, excuse me, I forgot the name of our firefighter that was here, but I think he's not on the call, but for example, the fire hydrants in the city are now what they call free flow water. So we're not pressurizing them, and that's to limit the use. So it really does affect the way we respond as a city to fire mitigation and to any other emergencies that require that resource. So again, anything we can do to spread the word, extremely, extremely helpful to help mitigate that response. And I'll put in here some more information about that. You can get a free water check for your sprinklers. You can also get some checks for your faucets and fixtures. And there's also some programs through the state where you can get reimbursed for xeriscaping, for example. So we do have an ordinance that prevents 100% xeriscape because we need about 30% vegetation in a residential area. But you can get pretty close to that. Other than that, I asked Josh what other updates there are. We don't have any updates about the inland port yet, but I hope to stay involved with your community council. Thank you for letting me speak, Dorothy. If there's any questions, I'll take them.
Eva, are you going to be staying on?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to go to Brady Frederickson with the airport. Eva, thank you so much. It was great conversation and good information. Brady, can we unmute Brady?
There we go. I'm unmuted. Thank you. Brady Frederickson, Salt Lake City Department of Airports. I'm the Director of Planning. I won't take up much time because I know you're on a 7:30 time frame, Dorothy. But I would, as a lot of you guys know, we've been working on a new master plan for the Lake City International Airport. The old master plan, which was done in 1998, was the master plan that set forth all the development that you see out there. This new plan will ensure that the new airport functions as good in 20 years as it does today. But the big news and what I'm here for is I'd like to invite you guys all out to what I think is very exciting. We're having our last public meeting, but we're actually doing it in person. We'll also have, it will also be virtually, and you can view it over the website as well. But the on June 17th at 7 p.m., which is a week from tomorrow, in the terminal greeting room, which is on level 2 of the new terminal, we're having an in-person open house. And during that open house, we will basically lay out the plans, what we've been working on for the last 3 years, that will show you the new development and the future of the airport. It's mainly focused on your airside facilities, and those airside facilities are where aircraft take off and land, runways, taxiways, things like that. But it does go into other facilities. But again, next Thursday, June 17th at 7 p.m. from 7 to 8:30 p.m. at the airport. It's in the terminal greeting room. We'll have validations parking. We'll validate parking. We will have an in-person public meeting. For a kind of an emphasis, we send out 22,000 flyers. So a lot of you guys should have gotten a flyer in your mailbox that gives you details, times, and we'll give you a little bit more information. But again, next Thursday, June 17th, 7 p.m. at the airport, there will be the last public meeting that we'll hold for this master plan. With that, thank you, Dorothy. Thank you for letting me present here. Does anybody have any questions? Or I think I'm 7:31. It's 1 minute over, Dorothy.
Okay, well, I don't think we've gotten your flyer yet.
Okay,
So,
they should be dropping. They told me yesterday that it's going to be today through the end of the week that people will be getting them.
okay, thank you. Okay,
Thank
so
you.
with that, thank you so much, Ray. One last person, and that I want to, Morgan Moore. Morgan, are you there?
I am here.
Okay, Morgan,
and I-
we have waited for you for a very, very long time. So, you know, we're going to go over our little time limit to make sure you're here because we've
Okay.
waited for you a long time. Tell
Well,
people
and
who you are.
I had a couple slides, but we're going to punt those for today, and I might throw them into the chat so everybody can see them. But yes, thank you, Dorothy. My name is Megan Moore. I'm with Logan Simpson, and we are a consulting group that is not even quite yet starting work with the city on the North Point master plan. And I know you guys have waited on this. I'm sure you know the overall area, but it's generally the area west of 215, north of 2200 north. And has a lot of that industrial area, a lot of airport elements, influence zones, Part 77 airspace, noise contours, a lot of natural resources included. So it's going to be a very complicated area to work in, but something that should be pretty rewarding and should be a fun project. As part of that effort, part of that outreach, community involvement is a necessity. So you'll hear from me again. We wanted to get in front of you tonight because we wanted to make you aware of that you'll probably see some information coming out on about one-on-one interviews and some initial community meetings, probably mid to late July. Don't quote me on that one, but it will be sometime this summer. We just wanted to let you know and make you aware that the process was starting and to keep an eye out for some of those engagement efforts that you should see throughout the summer. I'd also anticipate, if Dorothy lets me come back in September, your first meeting back in September. At that point, we should have a good idea and should have some deliverables almost ready to go on existing conditions. And we can give a kind of a report back of what we've heard from those stakeholder interviews, initial outreach efforts, as well as maybe some preliminary concepts. And past that point, we'll work through some concepts. The overall goal of this is to update the North Point Small Area Master Plan as it is now. And the entire process is expected to probably take us through maybe next February or March. So what's that? How'd I do? Pretty short?
Very good. You said open it up and you'd have the whole meeting, but we knew it was initially.
Yep.
But put on your calendar August 3rd. That's the first Tuesday in August.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, so that is the night out event. It is the joint event that Morton Meadows, or no, Jordan
Jordan Meadows, yeah.
Jordan Meadows,
That was once upon a time, we were Morton Meadows, once upon a time.
But we do that, and we would love to have you have Logan Simpson do a booth.
Okay.
And you'll be able, and you could be very creative about how you can get a lot of good feedback.
Okay,
at
that
event.
sounds,
We have
like
about 700 people that attend,
oh, well, that sounds like a great opportunity. August 3rd.
August 3rd.
Okay.
And we've got your information. We'll send it to you, but, and we'll look forward for your one-on-one interviews.
Okay.
Great.
Excellent. Thank you, Dorothy.
Okay. Councilman Rogers is with us. You can't see him, but he is with us, and we'll let you, Councilman Rogers, rather than having you do a report right now, I hope you're going to be able to be with us during the SITLA discussion, and you can add some things on with that.
For sure, Dorothy. I just wanted to say we're right smack dab in the middle of the budget. One of the huge priorities for me, the focus has been around public safety, as we heard Detective Oliver talk about our policing efforts and how we are 60 officers or more shy of what we should be. So for me, it's a huge funding issue as well as a morale issue for the police department. So just wanted to highlight that, and we're supposed to approve it next Tuesday.
Thank you for jumping in on that and giving us that information. So the community reports are really important, but I promised that we would start with our presentation at 7:30 because I knew we'd have other people. So if we get done with the presentation early, we'll go back on comments. Otherwise, we'll follow up from there. So with that, let me introduce our speakers tonight. So Gary, are you there? Oh, yeah. Gary, are you there? And Robert? I don't see.
We are here.
You are here. There you are.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Gary, right?
I'm
Is
here as
Robert
well.
there?
Right.
Okay, I'm gonna have each of you introduce yourselves. But before I do that, let me kind of explain how we're going to do this. Because we've had some experience with this. The State Institutional Trust Land Authority had been working with us for several months. We thought it was really important to talk about it, and so we wanted to make sure we got it done before we broke for the summer. There's a lot of information here. So in realization of that, we are going to have this recorded, as we said earlier. It's our intent to post that recording so people can go back over it. We want to make sure that our presenters can go through all of their information. And before we start any questions, if you have, as they're going through it, you may have questions that come up. And so one of the ways you can do it is with the chat. And I think our presenters will be monitoring the chat. So they can kind of get a feedback of what's going on. If there's some information that you want more detail on, you can write that in the chat. And that will let people kind of know, what things we need more information on in that. If you have an actual question that you want a response to, we'll deal with those at the end. The intent of the meeting is to educate people, inform them, and to focus on the issues and the challenges and the obstacles that are coming up. We could do questions all night long, but this particular meeting is designed to be an informational meeting, not only for the residents, but for our elected officials, our future elected officials. We don't see it as a political debate. There'll be plenty of that later on. And, but for now, we want to kind of focus on educating ourselves and making sure that people understand what the issues are. And with that, know that if we don't get through all the questions, you'll have two options. You can do questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand. We'll try to go through those chat questions. If we don't get through the questions, we will save them and we will send them to our presenters and ask them to prepare written responses. That's how we've done it in the past. And then we post those written responses to our website. It's the beginning of a conversation, not the end. We're very excited that these gentlemen have agreed to be with us at this time of night. And with that, Robert, I'll let you introduce yourselves.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Dorothy. And thanks for letting us join. It's good to see all of you, the Westpointe Community Council and Jordan Meadows as well. I'm Robert B. Hunem, and I'm a consultant with SITLA and with Mr. Gary McEntee, who is the private entity in this public-private partnership. And I work with them on community outreach and government relations. And it's been a really great experience for me to work with the city, with Councilman Rogers and others over the course, as Dorothy mentioned, the past few months, as we have been going through not just the motions, but some very, I think you'll see some extraordinary due diligence that Gary has done. And by the way, Gary's, I think, operating on New York time. And so this is, it's pretty late where Gary is. And I appreciate him jumping on with this. But I think what you'll see here tonight as Gary moves through this, the extraordinary due diligence and work that has been done with the North Temple landfill and the voluntary cleanup program, and the really careful and thoughtful process and procedure that we're going through with SITLA to make sure that we can do the best thing and the right thing for that 770 acres. So with that, I'm going to toss it over to Gary. He's going to carry the bulk of the conversation. I'll be monitoring chats and those sorts of things and playing back up to Gary when he needs it. But let me introduce to you my friend and colleague, Mr. Gary McEntee, who has great experience in the state of Utah for what, 15 years, Gary, doing this type of work.
Oh, actually a little longer, but thanks, Robert. My name is Gary McEntee. I'm with the Ninigat Group. We're working with SITLA on this project from a remediation and future development aspect of it. To give you a little bit of background on both SITLA, on Ninigat and myself, I was with and ran a environmental consulting firm that was the largest solid waste consulting firm, engineering consulting firm in the United States in the early 80s through the 90s. Got involved back here in Salt Lake in around 2000 with a brownfield development that you may know at the corner of Bangor and California. And with the Ninigat Group there, we remediated 400 acres of alum ponds. We were the largest brownfield project in the state of Utah at that time. And that's been a real success. And if you drive down Bangor Highway, on either side of Bangor, as you look in California, that's the property that was kind of a wasteland that we did with private money and remediated that property. While we were doing that, we got involved with the LDS Church and Suburban Land Reserve and helped them evaluate various options to remediate the North Temple landfill. One of the things I thought we'd do tonight, and I know many of you know this, but I thought we'd share a little background information on the landfill itself so that people can have a better understanding when we start talking about how we need to move forward with the remediation and what we need to do in the development. Rob or Dorothy, could you share the graphic that I sent to you that has the dates on it across the landfill?
Yeah, Dorothy, do you want me to do that, or is your host going to do that?
I think Allison, are you there?
Yeah, I am here. I just want to make sure I'm sharing the right one.
It has dates like 1973, 1965, and sections across the landfill.
I think it's the second one on that.
Oh, I've got it here. Let me get that open.
Great, thanks, Allison.
Yep. Let me know when you can see it.
Okay. Okay, great. There we go. Okay. So a little bit of history on the landfill. This landfill was operated by Salt Lake City as municipal landfill, starting in 1958 and going to 1979. If you look at the landfill, as Rob mentioned, it's 770 acres for the entire landfill. It sits north of I-80, and the far left-hand side of the bottom left-hand side of this graphic, you'll see the interchange of 7200. So you get a sense of where that's located. The initial area that was developed was Area 1, and you can see that that area shows 1959 to 1963. There's a canal that runs through the property, and you can see that just below the Bonneville Waste designation. That is the Brighton Canal. That's a canal that's owned by the LDS Church and provides water up to the duck clubs north of the site. The area south of that canal never had any waste filled on it. So that area never had any solid waste that was filled. What was done in those early years was that either an excavator or a drag line would dig a trench. The material from the trench would be put on the side, waste would be put into the trench, and then that dirt or cover material would be placed over the top of the trench. So if you look at the graphic, you can see that you've got these trenches that run in Area 1 in the north-south direction, but in Area 2 run in the east-west direction. I don't know that there was any real rhyme or reason in that era. This is well before Subtitle D or a lot of landfill regulations. So this was a common practice for municipality to reclaim land that was otherwise not being utilized or was low, and they're looking to fill it. From the landfill itself, the landfill began on the eastern edge, and you can see by the dates how they worked their way across the landfill. So Area 1, 1959 to 63, Area 2, 63 to 65. The next area north of that, 65 to 71, and the far area. As you move across the landfill, the waste gets deeper. The waste in Area 1 is between 4 and 6 feet deep. So this is not a deep landfill like you would see at the county landfill or any of the privately owned landfills. This is what's referred to as a shallow trench landfill, which makes for and allows for a very realistic brownfield development where you consolidate the waste into new repositories on the site. So basically you're taking waste from an area that would be relatively shallow, you're digging that out, you're taking all that waste together and you're putting it into a new location that's going to be managed on the site, but is going to be an area where you consolidate the waste, okay? The red dots that are shown here, and they really don't come that clear on this graphic that's on the screen now, are areas that we conducted test pits of this particular study. This was done a year and a half ago in terms of these test pits. Now, let me step back a second. Over the course of time, Suburban Land Reserve did a tremendous amount of studies out at this landfill. We were part of that, looking at different ways in which to remediate the landfill, anywhere from consolidating waste on site to taking some of the waste here and moving it to the Pioneer landfill, which is over at California Avenue, as well as cleaning the entire landfill off. So we ran a series of pilot tests and we looked at a bunch of economic analysis to see what was feasible. The issue with taking all the waste off this landfill is it's highly costly and creates a series of other issues in terms of transportation. How do you manage the leachate? How do you put all the waste in the truck? How do you put it into the rail? So that thought process was abandoned by Suburban Land Reserve as something that was not feasible. So what transpired here was that Suburban Land Reserve, LDS Church, began discussions with SITLA about working together on this landfill, either bringing in material to help fill areas that might be excavated or actually getting involved in taking ownership. Those conversations led to the LDS Church donating the land to SITLA. And that was done in 2018. Okay. The idea here was that Sittler would go forward and do just what I talked about, that they would work with the city and look towards remediating the site in a brownfield development by consolidating waste. Prior to actually taking title to that land and accepting that donation, Sittler went through a fairly extensive due diligence process that we assisted them on with a series of different environmental consultants from Salt Lake City, looking at older reports that had been prepared over the years. And reports on this landfill started as early as the mid-70s and continued all the way through like I said, 2015 to 2018. Over time, we, Sittler and Ninigrit, have probably done and completed at least 80 to 90 different locations where we've done either test pits or borings or installed wells. So we have a tremendous amount of information on the site. When Sittler took title to the property, that was done by going in with DEQ and enrolling in their voluntary cleanup program. That is a program that is administered under DEQ and headed up by an individual named Bill Reese. And I believe some of you have already spoke to Bill about this project. So Bill's been working with us for the last 5 years and working through what we refer to as site characterization, where we go out and we analyze the data that we collect on the site. We report back to Bill, we do the laboratory studies, and then we collectively get together with people from the county, the city, their technical people, as well as the technical people in DEQ, and look at the information that we've accumulated and see if there's any data gaps that we need to go back and reconfirm. So that process has been ongoing for the last 5 years. We are towards the portion in our process now where I would say we're on the backward side of the slope of site characterization. We still have a few more items that we need to identify. There's a few more data gaps that we want to fill. But then we'd be working towards what we refer to as a remedial action plan for at least an initial phase of this project. Okay. The premise that we've always talked about with DEQ is to remediate this landfill in a phased approach. Not try to go out and do the entire landfill at once, but basically work our way from the east side of the landfill over to the west over a series of different phases. At this point in time, we do not have a remedial action plan in place. I want to be very clear about that. We have not even submitted one to DEQ. We are still in the site characterization phase. All that information is shared. It's all public knowledge. It's on their website. You can obtain all the studies that we've done. You can look through those studies, or you can call us and we can summarize it for you. Either way, it's not a problem. What we're trying to do now, as I said, is work through another supplemental investigation on a couple areas that we would like to drill down and do a little more focus on. What I'm going to ask you to do is put on the next graphic so we can talk a little bit about some of the groundwater issues that we have on the site. Okay, this is excellent. So this is a groundwater contour map. These lines show the direction of the groundwater, and the numbers associated with the lines show the elevation of the shallow groundwater. One of the unique aspects of this site, and I would just tell you that you want to call it lucky, you want to call it fortuitous. I don't think there was a lot of pre-planning on this, but this site sits on an area that has a very significant clay deposit. And what I mean by that is underlying this site, we have thick deposits of low permeability clay. The result of that is that we have very little contamination or exceedances, the technical term, that have migrated off of the site. The groundwater on this property moves in a northwest direction towards the Great Salt Lake. So if you look at this map, you can see that the groundwater is moving towards the north and a bit towards the west. We have a little bit of a localized groundwater direction change in the southeast corner of the landfill. But other than that, primary direction of groundwater flow is toward the north. The small little black, red dots that you see on the boundaries and throughout the area here are actual test wells that were clustered. And what I mean by clustered, we did shallow groundwater and deep groundwater because we wanted to identify whether or not we were having any contamination that was going into a deep groundwater condition. The answer to that is no. We have an upward gradient, groundwater gradient, that is an upward gradient, and we have this clay lens that, for the most part, exists below the landfill. The area to the west of this graphic is identifying the off-site study that we did in conjunction with Salt Lake City. And what we were asked to do there was actually to go out onto the neighboring property, which is now owned by Comina, by Comina and Kennecott. The southern portion, if you look at our graphic, and if you took the landfill and cut it in half and went to the west, the northern area is owned by Comena, who's developing the properties along 700 North, and the southern area is owned by Kennecott. It's my understanding that Kennecott is using that land, has identified that land as a tailings pond buffer area, and is not something that they intend to develop whatsoever. But again, that's something you'll have to clarify with Kennecott if you want more information on that. DEQ on that has asked us to go out to about 900 feet onto the neighboring property to identify what they want to see is we want to look at all the constituents that may be coming off the landfill and wanted to be able to map that as it went on to the adjacent property. We only have two elements or compounds that we're seeing that are migrating off the site. That's arsenic, which is a unique compound because it's very prevalent in the valley. So when you look at whether or not that exceedance is caused by the landfill or naturally occurring, it's difficult to tell. And then we have an organic called 1,4-dioxane, which is not dioxin, but dioxane. It's an organic that we're seeing trace amounts out onto the neighboring property. To the north, we have very little, if any, exceedances that have gone to the north. So in the area where that southwest corner, that's the area of our focus with DEQ to fully understand what's going on in that particular corner. Again, I'm not like, you can speak to Bill direct and his staff. We're not talking about skull and crossbones here, but we are talking about compounds that are exceeding concentrations that we would want to see. So part of what we're going to be looking at is a remedial action plan to address that. Okay. I don't think you can see it on this graphic well, but I'm going to try to explain to you. The area that shows red that's on this graphic on the right-hand side, that is what we refer to as phase one. That's the area that we'll be preparing a remedial action plan for to start the initial phase of our remediation. The reason that's been selected is because the waste is the shallowest in that location, and it also has the least amount of leachate. And what I mean by leachate is it's the water that percolates through the ground, through the soil, and goes into these cells. So at the bottom of these cells, as I mentioned to you, you have low permeability clay, so it captures the water. So in some of these cells, we have leachate, that's water that has gone through the waste, is now sitting in the bottom of the cell. That leachate has to be treated, has to be collected and treated. But because that the least amount of leachate on the site is in the eastern portion, one of the things that we've discussed with DEQ is doing this initial phase so that we can look at and take the experience that we gain by doing this initial phase and apply that knowledge and that experience to the balance of the site. When we go forward and produce a remedial action plan, that plan will go out for public comment. That is something that is part of DEQ's process. It's always been part of DEQ's process, and we will continue to do that. We'll also reach out and have public, we'll have our public meetings and public outreach to walk people through our plan in terms of how we intend to go forward. Okay. Now you get to hear the chimes in my house that drive me crazy every time grandfather clock goes off at a particular hour. So we'll let that pass and I'll continue with this a little bit. If you could, Allison, if you could put on the last slide, I'll walk you through a very much a draft concept plan. And please, again, don't hold us to that. This is not something that is cast in stone. This is a concept that we're exploring, both with DEQ, both with the city, both with the Inland Port Authority. So, but we want to share this with you and show you some of our thinking about how we would go about doing this. So in the phase one, you can see 4 buildings. There's no rhyme or reason here. These are either light manufacturing, some type of warehouse, some type of technology building. But the idea being showing, try to give a scope of scale of what that would be. The first phase, it contains about 170 acres. As Rob mentioned, the entire property is 770 acres. Of the 770 acres, 50 acres is south of the Brighton Canal and has no waste on it. So we're looking at remediation of about 120 acres of waste, of area that gets waste. If you look in the southeast corner or to the right of your diagram, you'll see a couple things that are there. One is the future Mountain View corridor connection to I-80. And we're working with DOT to provide them that right of way so that they can bring Mountain View corridor in, and that would then connect to I-80 going both north and south. In that same corner, you see a rail line that exists today and goes under I-80. In working both with UDOT, the city, and the Port Authority, the intent there is to provide rail service north of I-80 by using that existing underpass. I want to be clear about something. When I say rail service, I'm talking about servicing buildings and in industry, but I'm not talking about a rail yard. And I know there's been quite a bit of conversation and a lot of speculation about putting a rail yard on Sittler's property. That is not something that Sittler has ever planned. It doesn't make economic sense for Sittler, and it's not in our planning, and we have no intentions of doing that. But I know we'll have questions at the end of the presentation, and we're glad to talk to you about that. But that's not something that is in Sittler's planning at all. You can see here that that rail comes up and exists now and goes into the International Center. So it comes up and goes to the right. Our intent is to have that rail come up and service one of our buildings or multiple buildings if the end users that we're looking to attract would like to have a multimodal transportation. So that would be rail and truck. So in that area where we have the manufacturing area in blue, we're just showing 2 rail spurs that would be able to come up there. In our conversations with the inland port, in working with them, they would like to work with us to have us help them have the rail extend across the property. So go from east to west. That is something that we haven't worked out in terms of a design. That is only a concept that we're talking about. Okay. So that's the idea. And then that rail would be able to go to the west and to the north and serve the areas, obviously north and west of where we are. Okay, so this is generally our plan. The waste that we would excavate out of phase 1 would go into what's called the open space repository 1. You see that we have 2 repositories. So we would consolidate the waste on site into those 2 repositories. That would be our plan going forward. The initial remedial action plan is only going to deal with phase 1 and the first repository. The balance of the site and how we go about doing that, in field, our activities and those type of items, that would be covered in a separate remedial action plan that would deal with and respond to the balance of the site. Okay. Let me see if there's anything else I can show to you. 7200 is intended, if you look at Salt Lake County's master plan, 7200 is a thoroughfare. It's a 5-lane road that is master planned to extend from I-80 and connect into 700 North. That would be the main route that vehicles would take up to 700 North and the properties north of the landfill, as well as another access point up to the prison and the areas that are being developed along there. Okay. Our feeling is that, and from Sittler's perspective, now let's step back a second. Sittler had this property donated to them from Suburban Land Reserve. Sittler has no responsibility for the waste. They are looking to work with the city and the inland port to find a means that makes the best sense to remediate this property and allow this property kind of a rebirth to be able to put into productive use. So right now, what we're working with is both parties trying to work through some of the specifics of how we go about doing that. But while we're doing that, we still have to work through DEQ. So that has been our main focus over the past year and a half, is working with DEQ, making sure we know exactly what we have out there to the best of our knowledge, working through and gravitating towards putting together our first remedial action plan so we can work on that first phase, use that as a proof of concept, and apply what we've learned there across the balance of the site. Dorothy, I think that's the overview. I think we can open up for questions, or if you'd like me to explain some other items, we'd be glad to do so. And Rob, if there's anything else you want to add to that, or James, I think that'd be appropriate now as well.
Gary, I think you did a great job. And just on Gary's final plan there, those where the remediation takes place and everything is consolidated, those are green spaces, open spaces. And then also, I don't know if you noticed, there's a nice bike trail that, as
Good
part of
point,
the
Rob.
city
Yep.
master plan, would have that regional connectivity. And it's very, very hard to put that sort of thing in next to rail. A lot of risk involved with rail lines and those sorts of things. But I think as we look at that, it's been very thoughtfully planned out about how we can create that walkability, connectivity to get folks, out and moving, foot traffic and pedal traffic as well. So there is a plan for that in that design as well. So I just
And
add
Rob-
that footnote, Gary.
Rob, thanks for saying that, because I probably didn't spend enough time on that. What we have tried to do with Salt Lake City, working with them, and, we're working closely with Laura Brief from Public Utilities, a lot of Rachel Otto, the mayor's office, and with James, is we're trying to work through and effectuate what the city had in their master plan that was produced in 2016. We're trying to blend that into how we go about remediating this, how we develop that. We've spent time with James, and we're very early in the process of looking at how do we attract the type of businesses that we all want to attract. So we're trying to blend that. Again, we're very early in the process, and that goes back to the graphic. The 4 buildings we showed is just a placeholder to get a sense of what could be done, but by no means do we have any specific plans, nor do we have any users in mind. It's just that early in the stage, but we want to share that with you, because without sharing something like that, it's difficult to understand it in terms of context. So you're getting an advanced look at something that we haven't even finalized ourselves in our own minds, but we want to share that with you as part of our open communication as we move forward. And James, I don't know if you want to add anything to that in terms of our ongoing conversations.
No, I just want to stress that we made this decision to come early, Dorothy, just so that the community could see that early on and see what that it is towards what we have always discussed as a community, that if something were to be built, that it is not a drop ship business warehouse, it's manufacturing.
We had Councilman Ferris join us as well. Dennis is there. And he's new to our discussions on this, and Council Member Ferris, we're so glad that you could be with us as well. I know we've had preliminary conversations with you as well. Any comment for the group? maybe he had to drop off.
Well, actually, Robert, I had promised all the elected officials and candidates that they wouldn't be put on the spot to respond
Okay.
to things.
Oh, great.
The-
Okay.
The idea
Well,
was
we-
that it gives them, information and that, and have this as an opportunity for the public, the residents to kind of get caught up. This is the first time residents have had this information. So I know you
Understood.
elected officials.
More
but
more
not
than
the
fair,
residents.
Dorothy. That's more than
Yep.
fair.
Thank you for reminding me of that. So Gary, there is a question in the chat from Terry Marasco. Terry, I hope I didn't slaughter your name. Behunin gets slaughtered all the time. But thank you for putting that in there. So Gary, there's about 6 really good questions here, and I think you can answer
I'm
them
not
really.
seeing the questions, Rob, so that's great.
Yeah,
Could you
they're
help?
in the, I'll read them to you. They're in the chat. I'll read them so everybody can hear. So the first one is, was any, I assume, Terry, was any of the landfill lined at some point back in its history?
No, it wasn't. And let me step back a second. I can't speak for Salt Lake City because I wasn't around in 1979. But my sense is that when the new Subtitle D regulations came into effect, that's when I believe Salt Lake City, I think they ran out of space, decided that they were not going to be able to meet those. So the landfill was, I say closed, it wasn't closed, it was discontinued. What I was saying before, though, is while there's not a traditional liner that you would see today if you would build a new landfill, the landfill is the land under the landfill is in essence lined with this clay deposit. We've done a series of borings all over the landfill and some cone petrometer tests, and in almost across the board, you've got a 5 and a 6 foot, and sometimes up to 12 foot of dense, low permeability clay underlying that. Now, I'll be very honest with you, there are within that bed formation, you do have certain sand lenses. So that one of the things that we're working with DEQ on is to work through a containment along the western side of the property so that we would minimize and or eliminate any future migration of any contaminants off of the site. So that, while that has not been designed yet, that is definitely a conversation that we're having with DEQ.
So Gary, that comment plays into the second question is, what can you tell us about any discussion of waste effluent leaking westward? So to your point.
Sure, and I think I mentioned before, we have some exceedances. I don't want to put the word minor or major on them. We have exceedances. Those are the things that we look at from a screening level and say, okay, this is greater than drinking water. This is greater than some other standards. Okay, where we have exceedances for the most part is in the southwest corner of the property. Of that, there's only 2 compounds that exceed out beyond 700 feet, and that's the 1,4-dioxane that I mentioned and arsenic. Everything else of that is either non-detectable or below a established standard. The leachate within the cell, however, is water leachate that needs to be treated. So you have contaminants in the leachate itself, but that has not made its way into the groundwater. I want to add one thing for clarification. I mentioned before, maybe I went over it too quickly. These, when I talk about these exceedances, we've identified them in what's referred to as the shallow groundwater. So that's an area that's within 15, 20 feet of the surface. There's also a deeper groundwater. That is what I mentioned before when we put in cluster wells. In those cluster wells, we put a well in the same wellhead where you have a shallow water and a deep water. And what we observed there was an upward gradient. So the pressure in the groundwater below the landfill is pushing up. That also helps minimize any migration going into a deeper aquifer. And you have this clay underneath the property. So all those studies and all those details are in the site characterization reports that have been submitted to DEQ. And again, be glad to walk anybody through those. And you're always welcome to give either Bill Reese or David Bird, the 2 individuals at DEQ under the voluntary cleanup program, a call at DEQ.
So
And
Gary,
Dorothy,
suffice-
Dorothy, I
ahead.
think you may have spoken to Bill. Is that correct?
I have not, but I know some of the other people.
Dina,
I've
maybe it
met-
was Dina that I spoke to. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think Deed had.
Yeah.
Before,
So-
just before I lose, that one of Terry's question was, who has been financing the work on all of this? All the work that's been done?
This has been done by Sittler. So let me step back. The work that was done, Sittler did all the work as their due diligence before they took title. And since that point in time, Sittler has funded all that work as well. The work that was done previous to that, so previous to 2015 or 2018, was done by Suburban Land Reserve. And there's quite a bit of data that was done by Suburban Land Reserve and a company called UTEC, and that's all part of the DEQ file as well.
And the last question he asked was, are you testing soils near the prison?
No, we're not testing near the prison. The furthest soil and the groundwater we've tested is out to where we, like I said, we either saw a non-detect or a low standard, and that's out 900 feet to the west.
And then Dorothy, Terry also asked, is the historical data available? I think, Gary, you've answered that multiple times. DEQ is the repository for literally all the things you've been talking about today.
Yeah, there's also a, if it would be helpful, there's a summary report that we did with Sittler to look back and look at all the different reports that were done, and I mean substantial reports, okay, that were done over the years. On DEQ's website, you'll see a review of the various reports. Excuse me, there's a small narrative to each of them, but it'll identify the reports, and they go back, I believe, the earliest reports were like made by EPA in 1975, something like that. But you can see those documents in the summary report. And the other thing I'd say to you, all those reports too, and that documentation, that was also shared with both Salt Lake City and the county when we did that due diligence.
Do we have some other questions here? Now, I know that oftentimes people are hesitant to put in the chat.
Sure.
And we can open up the,
Dorothy, yeah, that was one thing I was going to say is that Councilmember Ferris, he was disabled, so he couldn't speak or put anything in the chat, but he was listening and is here. So,
great.
Yeah, I've disabled, or I've re-enabled unmute, so everyone should be able to unmute. If you can't, let me know in the chat, please.
Councilman Rogers, you're still muted.
oh, it's because I've been pushing the mute. I don't think you want to hear me. So,
Some other.
Yeah, I would just say, while you have a little bit of silence here, Dorothy, just how really great, and Gary kind of alluded to this, I want to just put a exclamation point on it. In coordinating with the city, top to bottom, council, staff, and the mayor's office have just really in measurable ways rolled out the red carpet for us, with regular meetings, carving out time for special meetings and really collaborating in a meaningful way with us, to make sure that we're in line with what they're doing, and then encouraging us to come out and work with you all and have these types of meetings. And it looks like April's got her hand up, and so does Victoria and Dorothy, so I'll be quiet.
Okay, well, okay, so
Yeah, we had,
Victoria?
yeah, Victoria and then Dita. I didn't see April, so you might have seen something I didn't, Robert, but I saw Victoria and Dita jump in there
Yeah.
first. So let's start with Victoria.
Okay.
Victoria, you're gonna have to unmute yourself, or somebody's gonna have to unmute you.
There we go.
Okay, it's still not letting people unmute themselves and the chat is disabled. So
Okay, let me take a look at it.
sorry. Okay, I have a ton of questions, but I'm going to try to share time and be respectful. So I'll start around the remedial action plan.
Yes.
When can we expect the remedial action plan to be filed? How will we know it's been filed? And is there a plan currently in place, or will we be able to help with ensuring robust, active community voice and public comments?
There's no plan in place. We have not even started to draft it. That's kind of putting the cart in front of the horse, as Bill Reese would say. We are now going to be submitting to him a supplemental sampling analysis plan to address comments off the most recent report that we did for him in study. We will, well, under DEQ's process, there is a public notice provision that goes out, but with meetings like this, we'll be keeping this group, the city, and all the stakeholders up to date. Our intent here and the way SITLA operates is to make sure that we seek out the public input and public comment on this. So we will make it a point to make sure that people know when we're ready to do it. I would not expect that we would have a remedial action plan ready to be put out there and then have it commented on until sometime in like late fall, like in that November timeframe, something along those lines. And that's mainly because of we need to get back out in the field, conduct a few more studies. You've got to run them to the lab. You write the report, and then once we sit down with DEQ, then from there we need to then start drafting a remedial action plan.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for letting me know that some of the settings were off. My apologies. I had the check marks backwards. So we still have Dita with a question, and then Sandra's after Dita. If anyone else had a question and I didn't see your hand, please let me know. The chat should be re-enabled and you should be able to unmute now. So Dita, if you would like to unmute.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. So I apologize if you already answered this, but I'm wondering who is paying for the remediation?
Who's paying for remediation?
Yes.
We do not have that finalized yet. There's conversation that we're having. SITLA is going to be the entity that's with the voluntary correction program, but we are working with the city and the Port Authority for various funding mechanisms. But that has not been something that's been finalized.
Do you have a sense of how much this is going to cost?
Our original estimate for the entire landfill to be remediated was $135 million.
And what portion of it do you anticipate will be covered by those other entities?
I can't tell you that right now. We haven't got to that level of detail.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Dita. Sandra, I see your hand as well. You should be able to unmute.
I'm sorry, I don't know why my hand is up. It just went up and I can't get it down.
That's okay. Let me lower it for you. And
all right.
Well, thank you. Thank you. There's a lot of good information. Thank you all for putting this together.
Allison, I think Terry had a follow-up question about liquefaction and earthquakes.
yeah, did you want to take that?
Yeah, I'll let Gary take that. And any indication, Gary, of clay having cracks from numerous earthquakes?
We haven't seen that. Obviously, from a geotechnical study standpoint, that's something that'll have to be done when you start looking at buildings. There's no fault along that line. And just to give you a little background on that, when we did the Ninigret project, and please feel free to look at that as well in terms of our past experience, we had a couple fault lines and that became an issue. We don't have that out here, but it definitely is something that will be looked at from a geotechnical and structural standpoint when we start looking at buildings. But right now, we're not seeing that kind of concern for this particular location.
And Gary and Rob, I think that if you guys could stress that this is like the earliest of stages of 1,000 steps, we're probably in step 3 or 4 of where we're at.
Right.
So, I mean, I'm very appreciative for the depth that you're going into this, just so that the community knows exactly where we're at, how much more we have to do, especially with meetings with, Salt Lake City and also with inland ports. So.
Well, and James, I appreciate that. And that's true. And I think we've had this conversation as the way I think we all feel most comfortable. And that is that it's better to get information out there than let information continue to swirl around. And look, let's be very candid about this. There's been a lot of opposition to something called an inland port. Everybody's got a different definition of that. There's a lot of people that have made comments about Sittler's land and what Sittler should do with it. And that's never been part of our plan. And I think we talked to Dorothy about that the last meeting we had. So there's a lot of misinformation out there. And the best way to combat that and get everybody, kind of working together is to get the information out as early as possible. What I just ask is please don't hold us to things that we share with you that are in conceptual stages. And please know that we're coming to you in the earliest part of the process to bring you up to speed on our thought process, but also to get your input so that we can do that. To give you an example, we've now had a series of meetings in the last 5 days with Salt Lake City Public Utilities, DOT, Patriot Rail, and just to make sure that we're all coordinated and we know what the needs are for each one of us. For example, DOT, in terms of their Mountain View corridor. Well, when you put that Mountain View corridor there, underneath it, if you look at that clover leaf that comes in, you've got sewer, you got stormwater, you have water lines, you have utility lines that all impact on public utilities. So we're trying to do as much upfront planning as we can, so we don't have the oops that come with projects later on where we see we have conflict. So that has always been Niniga's approach. It's always been Sil's approach, and reaching out like tonight is just part of what we feel most comfortable in doing, getting that information out so we can get the feedback. But again, please don't hold us to conceptual things, and we will be back in touch with you as things progress.
Thank you. I see Senator Escamilla has her hand up, so I wanted to give her an opportunity for her question too.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Allison, for managing this. I know it's pretty painful sometimes. Gary, thank you for an amazing in-depth description, and it actually has been one of the best presentations I've heard on this very complicated area and land, and there's a lot of players. So you did mention, you were very clear, the CITLA has no interest at this point. And you said, and I can expand on that if needed, on this idea of the having that area be part of, some of the rail components or that have been discussed in the last couple of months, I guess, or since January more. Can you now explain to me, I want this to be clear for the public, because this is where it gets really complicated. Is this jurisdictional questions? At one point, CITLA, this is CITLA's property.
Yes.
No matter what happens and no matter what the inland port says or even the state legislature, right? Can you explain?
That is my understanding, that it's CITLA's property. They can do what they want. They can develop what they want. If you want to talk about legalese in terms of what the legislature can do, I'm probably not the authority to say that. But let me go back to that a second, because, and I know everybody knows there's an inland port board meeting coming up, and maybe the questions are more appropriate for that, and I know it's not the position for James right now to discuss it, but what we've been working with the inland port and their rail consultant, and I can tell you in the conversations I've had with their rail consultant and the staff at the inland port, they're not looking for what people consider to be a rail yard north of I-80, okay? What they want to do is to be able to have rail service to industries and be able to attract industries to the area that's north of I-80. That's the reason for the improvements to the underpass that you saw at the eastern edge of our property, and the rail going up along our property and possibly across our property. I think one of the things that I've experienced, I'm just talking about myself, is the term inland port meant a lot of things to a lot of people. And I don't think personally it was ever explained well. I don't think there was ever a plan that was articulated that people could understand what the plan was. And then I think people utilize that terminology, and I don't say inappropriately, but you interchanged rail service with inland port. And we've had that issue with the director of Sittler using the wrong terminology sometimes. And we're like, no, it's not an inland port. It's just a rail service. So I think that's been part of it, but I can tell you emphatically that Sittler has no intention of building a rail yard on his property. And though there's been plenty of people who have even put together graphics to suggest that that would be a good use of the landfill area, but we have no intentions of doing that.
Thank you so much. And Gary, maybe they should hire you to explain and do some of this stuff, but I appreciate that. And I just wanna, that was very difficult as we were going through this legislative session, because as you can understand, there's some PTSD related to our communities and inland port, whatever that means.
Right.
For the different people. So hearing from Sittler, at least where they are in that position, making it very clear, and you've been extremely clear, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Welcome.
Senator, let me punctuate what Gary said about, and your question about Sittler exercising its exemption, which it has by, constitutionally and by virtue of the legislature, and also by, multiple court cases and working with land use authorities. Sittler always comes through the front door, always. That's why we're doing this. That's why we're working with Salt Lake City. It's why we want to work with you in the legislature. That exemption cannot be thrown down, casually. And so the process, and James, Councilman Rogers alluded to it earlier, we are very, very early on in this, very thoughtful, very careful, because it is important. These early decisions will, frame and shape how we do things in the future. So, I can't speak for Sittler specifically, but my experience with them is that I haven't seen them use that exemption. We want to work with the community. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you.
Robert? This is
Yes.
Dorothy. Just briefly explain what you mean by the exemption. Not everybody in this meeting would understand what
So-
that's about.
I think what Senator Escamilla was referring to is that Sittler, as a sovereign entity, can come in and do what it needs to do, really without other land use authority. It is sort of its own land use authority. It has that power to do that, as does a university or other state entities have a certain amount of eminent domain to conduct their business and do what they need to do. But that's something that really is very, it can be a heavy hand, but Sittler is always coming through the front door, always working with people.
And Rob, just to add to that, whether it's a legal authority or not, I think we all look at this and say, the only way this is going to be successful is that we're all working together. And I think that's exemplified in our meetings with Salt Lake City, and that, Salt Lake City has land use authority, but we're sitting there working with public utilities. We're working with people to make sure that the traffic is correct, that it matches up with the master plan for traffic. So there's just so much coordination that has to go on that, to be in a situation where anybody tries to roll over somebody or cut a corner on a project like this, it just doesn't make sense. And in the end, I think that approach makes a project that much more difficult to be successful.
Dorothy, if you have time for one more question, Lisa has a question about the rail service. And Gary, she said, can you define the rail service to a particular business, what that means? If we're not talking about a rail yard, she's imagining a loading dock at the back of a warehouse.
Sure. Okay. I'll a couple things. Basically, there are certain industries that are highly dependent on having rail bring in the raw products. I'll give you an example, and you're more than willing to welcome to go up and look at our development that we have in Syracuse, Utah. On that property, we have an 85-acre industrial park. We extended rail to that property through Union Pacific. We have two substantial rail users. One is a company called U.S. Cold Storage, and the other one is called Pacific Steel, and they're both very different. But they both wanted rail for different reasons. U.S. Cold Storage is just that. It's a cold storage facility, a freezer facility that handles a lot of food. It's a 300,000 square foot facility. A major client of theirs, like Kellogg's, people like that. They wanted rail as a hedge against higher cost for transportation and gas costs. So they wanted to have a a dual modal facility where they could bring in product or ship it out by rail, or they could bring it in by truck. So that was a hedge against gas prices or just to have the flexibility. Pacific Steel is a company that does specialized steel. They bring the steel in on railroad cars. The railroad car actually goes into the building and is offloaded in the building. And then that roll of steel is then utilized into different products. Whereas US Cold Storage has a rail that runs along the side of buildings. So you have loading docks that enter out into the rail cars themselves. So depending upon the industry, they either come into the building and the material is offloaded, or you have something where you have rail docks, like a truck dock at the back of a building.
Would you like to address the question about the EPA involvement and also?
I can't see it, Dorothy or
Yeah,
Robert.
I'm sorry.
There's a question in the chat about, thank you, Dorothy, for pointing that out. It just is asking about the degree of EPA involvement or EIS.
Okay. EPA is given jurisdiction on this property over to the Utah DEQ, specifically under the voluntary cleanup program. So they will be administering that. There's not an EIS component in terms of the regulatory requirement here, but this is in place of that would be the site characterization studies and efforts. Then there would be the remedial action plan. And then let me go back to the process. Let's take the process and go forward, what you can expect. So we continue to work on the site characterization. Again, that's doing the testing, doing the analysis to the satisfaction of DEQ. When we think we've got enough information on what's called phase one, right? And how we're going to go about doing that, then we move to a remedial action plan where we identify the data we've collected, the proposed remediation plan, all the different safeguards that would be in that. So for example, odor controls, vector controls, daily cover on the waste. What do you do if you have special waste? For example, look, we know this is there's 660 acres of actual landfill. Okay, we've done 150, we've done 90 recently, but there's probably 150, 200 different tests that have been done in locations, but it's still 660 acres. We're going to find something that's going to be a special waste, whatever that is. It's going to be tires. It might be a drum or whatever. We'll have a provision with DEQ that when we're excavating this and we identify a special waste, we have a process to go through that. We test it, we then identify what it is, and then we move it off to the appropriate disposal facility. So within that remedial action plan, all those procedures will be in that. DEQ will have someone that's be monitoring the activities on the site as we go forward. We'll have an environmental professional out there in addition to any contractor with equipment doing the work, okay? When that is completed, okay, when that excavation is completed, then DEQ will review that, and if it's done in accordance with the plan, they'll issue what's called a no further action letter, meaning that there's no further action required to satisfy the intent of that remedial action plan. That's the process that goes along, okay? So again, going back to this, the next step is finish the site characterization, start drafting and working on and formulating a remedial action plan, have that engage the public on that, have that go to public comment, get those comments back, finalize that, and move towards remediation.
Allison, you there?
Yep.
Okay, so we have 20 minutes left. And there is a question, I think, about traffic, which we know is one of our favorite topics to talk about. Is that something that you want to talk, maybe go back to that?
Is there a question about traffic, or is there a
traffic studies, or is the rail study and traffic study going to be conducted?
we're not, at this time, we're not looking at a traffic study because we, quite frankly, do not have a definitive development plan for the site. I think, however, we are working with Salt Lake City in terms of their traffic and master planning, and they have done quite a bit of research and have master planned out that area. As I mentioned earlier, the main access point to this particular location will be 7200. That's the interchange that will feed this particular property. 7200, as part of the Salt Lake County's master plan, is to be expanded to a 5-lane road that would go from I-80 up to 700 North. The 5 lanes would be up that area, that alignment would be 150 feet wide. It would have two lanes in both the north-south direction with a turning lane and a median. And alongside of that would be a bike and or pedestrian way that would allow traffic and pedestrians to move along the extension of 7200. In addition, there will be a road network within the property that will be anchored by a road which is basically 400 North. In that vicinity, it might be adjusted one way or the other, but that would be the traffic. But I believe if you go back to the master planning that was done by Salt Lake County, you can look at all the assumptions that they've made on that. With respect to rail, while we haven't done the study, but others have done studies, and I believe the Inland Port will be putting out, if not they haven't already, some statistics in terms of the benefit of having rail in terms of minimizing truck traffic. We have not done that study, but the intent here is to provide at least a portion of the site with a multimodal opportunity so that we could reduce some of the truck traffic through those end users by the use of rail, which everybody believes is a little bit more environmentally friendly and cost competitive.
Does that answer your question, Victoria? There's a lot of information.
I think at this stage, that's as good an answer as we can get.
I'm sorry to tell you that I think you're right.
No,
So-
Mr. Gary, I also have to tell you, I just love listening to you. I'm from Newburgh, New York, and it's like
Oh,
listening
God,
to one of my
wait.
uncles. So
Okay, so
thanks.
can we divert for a second? Since
Yeah.
I got a fellow New Yorker. So for the first 20 years of my career, I worked for that engineering company in Middletown, New York.
Nice.
Took 84 across Newburgh Beacon Bridge and lived for the first 5 years in Wappinger Falls. So we're
Oh my
kindred
gosh,
spirits.
those are all of my stomping grounds. And in Utah, we have Highway 80 going through Salt Lake City, and then we've got Ogden on 84, and it's almost exactly the same dynamic here.
It
I
is.
love it.
You and I need to get the sidebar and talk about old times.
All right, as long
There
as
we
you
go.
bring me good bagels when you come out, it's a deal.
That's an easy deal. Not a
All
problem.
right.
Joseph, you had a question here. Did you want, I think we've got time to follow up on it. Allison, are we all locked out?
No, I didn't have a question. No, thank you.
Oh, okay. Some other things here that we've missed. I don't want to. If I don't, okay, so one of the things, while I've got all of you here, I received the notice from the Inland Port Authority on their upcoming board meeting, which I sent out to everybody to make them aware of the Inland Port meeting. Maybe you could help tie some of the ends together and explain how this may apply to what the Inland Port Authority is going to be talking about next week.
Dorothy directed that to Rob and myself.
Anybody who has answers.
I will tell you, I have no answer because I do not know what is on their agenda. And quite frankly, I wasn't even certain if the meeting was going to be in person or if it was going to be remote and on Zoom. So you're in a more knowledgeable position than I think Rob and myself.
Yeah, it is. The meeting is remote. So
Okay, so Councilman Rogers, can you talk to this to help people understand how all these different pieces of information fit together and how this fits with the board meeting next week?
You know, I don't think we're discussing this property at all in the port
Right.
meeting. I actually have a meeting tomorrow to discuss the actual agenda moving forward. I'm looking at the agenda in front of me right now. And we have a sustainability report. We've got a metrics report. We've got the University of Utah MBA capstone project survey. These are all informational items. We've got the project area letter of intent, intelligent crossroad network.
There's something in there about an assessment of the Northwest Quadrant. I wasn't sure what that was about.
You know, I am not seeing that. I'm actually looking at the proposed agenda right now. And there's a procedural talking about, because of the meeting will be held virtual. Well, there's going to be a new designation for a new chair. After 2 years, my time is ending. Public hearing, consideration of a resolution for a budget amendment, approving the fiscal year 2021 amended budget. There's action item for approving the fiscal year proposed budget. Approval of the minutes, executive director report, it's all informational. Sustainability report, again, and informational. So it's a full agenda, but there's nothing that I can see. But I will ask on my leadership meeting, I think it's tomorrow, in regards to the landfill, but the Sitla property. But I don't think there's anything coming up on that, but I will double check with that, Dorothy, and get back with you.
Well, I think it's very helpful to have this type of dialogue, and this is really good information. And we knew how important it was to have this done. And that's one reason why we really worked hard to have you guys here tonight. And you guys went way out of your way to be here tonight. And helping us to figure out how all the pieces fit together is really important, because when we don't know that, people project how those pieces fit together. And sometimes that isn't quite accurate. And so the more you can help us with understanding how all the pieces fit together, I think the better the quality of the dialogue.
I agree, Dorothy. And I also agree that I should carry Gary wherever I'm going, so he can actually discuss what an inland port is and what it isn't. So he did a great job tonight, really detailing that.
Thanks, James.
Dorothy, I put my email in the chat for everybody. If they have follow-up questions or we can help with information, I can be a point of contact for this group and, point people to Gary or amass information from Gary. And we just might mention that Kyle Paisley, who is actually the Sitla designee and representative on our team with Gary and with me, was unavoidably unavailable tonight. And so we proceeded without him, but we can certainly funnel questions to Kyle if there are further clarifications. Is that fair to say, Gary?
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything else at this point? It is not my nature to have a meeting end 12 minutes early. It's like having food left on your plate. It's like sinful.
Dita, not to, pick nits, but your invitation said 8:30.
Yes,
So-
Dorothy, the agenda says 8:30, so we are not ending early.
Oh,
But we're
Oh.
happy to go on. I
oh,
find my
Dorothy,
Oh,
I was
well-
just about ready
Oh,
to
cereals.
give a hell of a soliloquy and kill all the time.
oh, well, see, now I'm feeling, usually Allison, makes,
I know
Yeah,
this is
well,
a very
well,
important topic and we had a lot of questions, but I think if we don't have any more funneling in, we could give everyone back some time now.
so thank you so very much.
Dorothy,
Yes.
Terry, I just had a quick question. If there'll be air quality monitoring over the site to see if anything is leaking into the air at any point or continuously during remediation.
Yes, we will have an air monitoring. One thing, you asked that question, Terry. One of the things, if you look at this landfill, there really was not a cap put on it. So it's just that, fill of dirt that was put on top of it. And the last waste that went into that landfill was some 40 plus years ago. So one of the items here is that we have very little, if any, methane that's in here. Everything is already, the methane has kind of dissipated, if you will, on the project, but nonetheless, we will set up ambient air monitoring stations during the remediation process. That is definitely part of the standing operating procedure when you remediate a landfill.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Very, very much. It was very helpful. Glad for all of you to be here. So that means it must be 11 o'clock in New York. Is that right?
It is, but Dorothy, let me just make one other comment to the group. This is fine. I got nowhere to go tonight. Last night, I was involved in a Syracuse City Council meeting that ran long and that was opposite the Jazz game. So I had the TV on in the other room while I was still going through the City Council meeting. So tonight was a pleasure. So no problem at all. There was no conflict.
Well,
If we go a little longer, we'll hear the chimes at midnight, Gary.
There you go. You know my chimes, Rob.
Gary, thank goodness our council meeting ended early so I could watch our game too. So.
Oh my God, what a great second half. Absolutely.
Yeah, it was
great second
amazing.
half. A lot of fun.
well, we're all in better moods as long as they keep winning. So
That's
Yep.
exactly right.
Thanks, Dorothy. Appreciate all
Thank
your
you,
hard work
everybody.
with this.
Really appreciate it.
You.
Look forward to
much,
speaking with
everybody.
you again.